My name is Maya Evans, and for 32 years, I've shared my face with another person. From the moment we were born, Chloe was my reflection, but where I was quiet, she was loud. Where I found comfort in the hushed, predictable order of the library where I work as head archivist, she craved the chaotic, vibrant noise of the art world. We were identical twins, two halves of a whole, but we built entirely different lives. I liked my world contained, catalogued, and safe. Chloe's was a brilliant, messy explosion of color. I was in the deep quiet of the after-hours library, reshelving philosophy texts in the 100 section. It was a ritual I found deeply calming. The only sounds were the soft thud of book bindings and the whisper of the climate control system. My phone, vibrating on the metal cart, was a jarring intrusion. The screen glowed with unknown number. I almost didn't answer. My life runs on schedules, not disruptions, but a strange, cold prickle ran down my spine. Maya Evans? A man's voice asked, flat and official. This is she. This is Sergeant Miller, with the 14th Precinct. I need you to come to the Aurora Tower, immediately. Apartment 42A. The world seemed to slow down. Aurora Tower. Apartment 42A. Chloe's penthouse. The one she'd bought with the proceeds from her Urban Echoes series. The one with the floor-to-ceiling windows. And the terrifyingly beautiful balcony that made me dizzy to look over. What's happened? My voice was a tight wire. Is it my sister? Is Leo okay? There was a pause on the line. A silence that was heavier than any I'd ever known in my library. There's been an incident involving your sister. Please, just come as soon as you can. The drive across the city was a nightmare of blurred lights and a hollow, pounding rhythm in my ears. I couldn't form a coherent thought. Incident. The word was so bland, so terrifyingly nonspecific. A car accident. A break-in. My mind, usually so adept at organizing information, spun in useless, panicked circles. When I reached Aurora Tower, the lobby was swarming with police. The glittering marble and chrome felt like a movie set for a tragedy. A young officer with a grim face escorted me to a private elevator that opened directly into the penthouse foyer. The door slid open, and the scene hit me like a physical blow. Chloe's beautiful, chaotic home, a space usually filled with half-finished canvases, scattered art books, and the lingering smell of turpentine and coffee, was now violated by strangers in uniform. They moved with a quiet, efficient purpose that made my stomach clench. And then I saw it. The massive sliding door to the balcony was wide open. The city lights twinkled mockingly beyond, and a cold night breeze swept through the room, carrying with it the scent of rain and a profound, final wrongness. Sergeant Miller approached me. He was a man in his 50s, with a kind, weary face that was currently etched with a pity I didn't want to understand. Ms. Evans, he began, his voice low. I'm so sorry to have to tell you this. Your sister Chloe is deceased. It appears she jumped from the balcony earlier this evening. The words didn't make sense. They were just sounds, empty of meaning. Jumped? Chloe? My sister, who clung to life with the ferocity of a vine seeking the sun. Who had fought for every scrap of her success. Who had embraced single motherhood with a joyful, messy passion. Who had called me just 2 days ago to excitedly describe the dinosaur-shaped cake she'd ordered for Leo's 6th birthday next month. No. I whispered, the word a dry leaf in my throat. That's not possible. There's a mistake. She has Leo. I'm afraid not, he said gently, and the gentleness was worse than anger. We have an independent witness from the building across the way. I'm truly sorry for your loss. Grief would come later, a tidal wave that would threaten to drown me. What flooded me in that moment was a cold, stark, absolute disbelief. Suicide was a quiet, desperate act of surrender. Chloe was neither quiet nor desperate. She was a force of nature. This wasn't an ending she would ever choose. It was an interruption. A violent, grotesque interruption. Leo, I gasped, my heart seizing in my chest. Where is my nephew? They led me to a guest bedroom. My little nephew was sitting on the edge of a vast, king-sized bed, his small legs dangling. He looked impossibly tiny, dwarfed by the luxurious linens. He was clutching Barnaby, the threadbare stuffed elephant I'd given him for his 3rd birthday. The boy was here when it happened. He was found by the housekeeper. He's in shock. He hasn't spoken a word since. A female officer sat quietly in a chair nearby. Leo's face was a pale, blank mask. His eyes, usually so bright and curious, were wide and empty, seeing something none of us could. I sat beside him and put my arm around his small, rigid shoulders. He didn't lean into me. He didn't cry. He just sat there, a silent, breathing statue of trauma. I pulled him closer, resting my cheek on his soft hair, and felt a part of my own soul fracture. The twin thread, the connection to Chloe, may have been severed, but a new, desperate bond to her son was forged in that moment, tempered in a fire of protectiveness so fierce it stole my breath. The following day was a fog of arrangements and grim faces. We met with Chloe's lawyer, a severe woman named Ms. Goodwin, in her sterile office. Chloe's will was straightforward. She named me, Maya Evans, as Leo's sole guardian and trustee of his inheritance, until he came of age. It was a document full of love and trust. But as Ms. Goodwin finished speaking, a voice cut through the room, cold and sharp as broken glass. This is quite unacceptable. Richard Blackwood, Chloe's father-in-law, rose from his chair. He was a man carved from ice and old money, his suit costing more than my car. He had never approved of his son James marrying a bohemian artist, and his disdain for Chloe had been palpable. Since James's own tragic death a year ago in a sailing accident, that disdain had curdled into something colder. Maya is a librarian, he stated, as if my profession were a congenital disease. She has no experience raising a child, let alone a boy who has just suffered an immense trauma. My wife, Isabella, and I are his blood. We will be seeking immediate custody of Leo. He belongs with his family. The air left my lungs. Take Leo away from me? The last piece of Chloe I had left? I looked at my parents, sitting beside me, their faces ashen. They were retired teachers, good people, but they were no match for the Blackwoods' wealth and influence. I saw the fear in their eyes, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that Richard Blackwood could do exactly what he threatened. That night, back in the eerie silence of Chloe's penthouse, with Leo finally asleep in his room, I felt the walls closing in. The police had called it a suicide. Richard Blackwood was trying to take my nephew. The world had accepted a story that felt like a lie. Driven by a need to feel close to her, I began to tidy her studio, my hands trembling as I touched her paintbrushes, still caked with her last colors. On her desk, buried under sketches and tubes of paint, was her well-worn copy of a biography on Frida Kahlo, an artist she deeply admired. I picked it up, and a folded slip of paper fluttered to the floor. It was a note, written in Chloe's familiar, looping handwriting. The paper was crisp, not old. The ink was fresh, and the words, when I read them, made my blood turn to ice in my veins. If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. Protect Leo. I read it 3 times, my heart hammering against my ribs. The official story was wrong. The doubt that had been a whisper in my mind became a deafening roar. Chloe didn't jump. She was pushed. Or she was forced. Or she was afraid. Someone had done this. And the note, a desperate message hidden in plain sight, was a warning. They had come for Chloe, and if I didn't find out who they were, they would come for Leo next. The note burned a hole in my pocket. It wasn't an accident. For 3 days, I carried Chloe's secret with me, a ticking bomb of fear and certainty in a world that had declared her death a closed case. The police offered condolences and moved on. The world saw a tragic, unstable artist, but I saw a warning, and I saw a target on my nephew's back. The formal custody papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server to the library. I stood frozen in the periodicals section, the crisp legal document feeling like a declaration of war. The Blackwoods petition painted me as emotionally fragile, socially isolated, and, quote, to provide a stable environment for a traumatized child. They cited my quiet life as a liability, my grief as instability. They were going to use my own nature, the very parts of me that were opposite to Chloe, to take the last piece of her away from me. My lawyer, a kind but overwhelmed man named Mr. Phillips, laid out the grim reality. The Blackwoods have immense resources, Maya. They can drag this out, hire expert witnesses, and put you through a brutal psychological evaluation. The court might see their wealth as stability, compared to, well, a single librarian. The word hung in the air. A single librarian. It sounded so small, so inadequate against the might of the Blackwood Empire. I thought of Leo, still silent, clinging to Barnaby. I thought of the note. If I lost him, I'd lose any chance of uncovering the truth. I'd be handing him over to the wolves, maybe even to the people Chloe was warning me about. That's when the desperate, insane idea took root. It came to me as I was staring at our reflection in the dark screen of my computer monitor. My face, pale and strained, was Chloe's face. The same high cheekbones, the same green eyes, the same arch of the brow. The world had always seen us as interchangeable. What if, just for a little while, I made that true? What if, I said to Mr. Phillips, my voice trembling with the audacity of it, what if I wasn't, quote, emotionally fragile? What if I was resilient? Like Chloe was? He looked at me, confused. I'm not sure I follow. The court ordered psychological evaluation, I pressed, the plan forming with terrifying speed. They expect to evaluate Maya, the librarian. What if they evaluated Chloe instead? Mr. Phillips stared at me, aghast. Maya, that's fraud. It's incredibly risky. If you're caught, if I don't do something, I lose Leo. I interrupted, a strength in my voice I didn't recognize. Chloe was a fighter. The decision was made. The deception began that night. I moved into the penthouse, the air still thick with Chloe's perfume and absence. Leo watched me from the doorway of his room, his silent gaze a constant, painful reminder of why I was doing this. I started with her wardrobe, a riot of color and texture that felt alien against my own uniform of sweaters and slacks. I forced myself into her silk blouses and tailored jeans. I stood in front of her full-length mirror and practiced. I wasn't just putting on clothes, I was putting on a skin. I studied videos on my phone, clips from her gallery openings, videos of her laughing with Leo. I mimicked the way she tossed her hair, the confident set of her shoulders, the slightly louder, more expressive tone of her voice. I practiced her laugh, a sound that had once filled rooms, and now felt like a ghost in my throat. I was an archivist after all. I was just archiving a person, and then becoming her. Living in her space, I began to see the cracks in her perfect life. The art was bold, but the drawers were messy. Bills were shoved haphazardly into a kitchen drawer. And then, while searching for a pen, I found it. Tucked behind a stack of cookbooks was a small black device, no bigger than a thumbtack. A camera. My blood ran cold. A frantic search revealed another in the living room, hidden in a smoke detector, and a third with a view of the balcony door. Someone had been watching her. Every move, every moment. The police had missed this. They saw a suicide. I was living in a crime scene. The weight of it all was crushing me. The impersonation, the fear, the grief. One evening, after a particularly draining session of practicing Chloe's flamboyant gestures in the mirror, I broke down. I sank to the floor of her walk-in closet, surrounded by her clothes, and sobbed, the silks and linens muffling the sound. A small shadow fell over me. Leo stood there, Barnaby dangling from his hand. He hadn't voluntarily approached me since the tragedy. He looked at my tear-streaked face, at Chloe's clothes I was wearing. For a moment, I saw a flicker of confusion in his eyes. Then he took a tiny step forward. His voice, when it came, was a hoarse, unused whisper. So quiet, I almost missed it. "The bad man," he whispered, his eyes wide with a fearful memory. "The bad man saw Mommy crying." Then he turned and padded back to his room, leaving me frozen on the floor, Chloe's silk blouse clutched in my hand. He hadn't just spoken, he'd confirmed everything. There was a bad man, and he had been watching. The game was no longer just about custody. It was about survival. Living as two people is a special kind of hell. By day I was Maya, the grieving sister, meeting with my soft-spoken lawyer, visiting my worried parents, trying to provide some semblance of normalcy for Leo. I spoke in my own quiet tones, wore my own comfortable, muted clothes. But underneath the Maya skin, Chloe was constantly buzzing, a performance waiting to happen. The psychological evaluation was scheduled, and the pressure was a vice tightening around my temples. The worst moments were with Leo. He would look at me sometimes with a flicker of confusion, especially when I slipped, when a gesture was too flamboyant or my laugh too loud. I was a poor copy, and the child who knew both the original and the imitator could see the seams. I'd find him staring at family photos, his small finger tracing Chloe's face, then mine. It broke my heart. I was lying to the one person I was trying to protect. My only solace was the investigation. The hidden cameras had proven the penthouse was compromised, so I started searching for a place where Chloe might have felt safe enough to be truly herself. I remembered an old key on her keychain, labeled only with a street number downtown. I'd always assumed it was for a storage unit. I found it after dark, a narrow door squeezed between a pawn shop and a closed-down diner. The key turned with a heavy clunk. The space inside was small, dusty, and smelled powerfully of oil paint and turpentine. This was Chloe's real studio. The paintings here were nothing like the vibrant, saleable works in her penthouse. These were dark, chaotic, and terrifying. Canvases were slashed with angry blacks and bloody reds. Shadowy figures loomed in the backgrounds. In one, a woman who looked like Chloe was drowning in a sea of green, while a man with the blurred features of James, her late husband, reached for her from a capsized boat. The paintings were screams on canvas. This was where she poured out her fear. It forced me to look harder at James's death. A year ago, he'd drowned in a sailing accident off the coast. A tragic accident, everyone said. But Chloe's art suggested something else. I started digging into the Blackwood Empire. On the surface, they were philanthropists, their name on hospital wings and museum wings. But beneath the glossy charity galas was a privately held conglomerate, Blackwood Global, with interests in shipping, manufacturing, and waste management. It was a vast, impenetrable fortress of money and power, the kind of power that could make inconvenient accidents happen. The custody battle forced a confrontation I was dreading. Mr. Phillips arranged a mediation at the Blackwoods' sprawling estate. It was a trap, designed to intimidate me. I went as Maya, dressed in a simple gray dress, my shield of quietness firmly in place. Richard Blackwood held court in a library that smelled of old leather and older money. He didn't rise when I entered. "Maya," he said, his voice like gravel. This unpleasantness could have been avoided if you'd simply seen reason. A child needs structure, legacy. His wife, Isabella, was a stunning woman with ice-blonde hair and eyes that held no warmth. She stood by the fireplace, a silent statue of disapproval. "We can offer Leo opportunities you cannot even imagine," she said, her voice a smooth, sharp blade. "The best schools, travel, security." Then there was Marcus, James's younger brother. He lingered in the doorway, a handsome man with a restless energy. He was the only one who looked uncomfortable. While Richard and Isabella launched into a rehearsed speech about my inadequacies, Marcus's eyes kept darting to me, and there was something in his gaze. Not hostility, but a strange, appraising curiosity. Once, when Richard made a particularly cutting remark about Chloe's volatile nature, I saw Marcus flinch, almost imperceptibly. "My sister was a wonderful mother," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, clinging to my Maya persona. "She was an artist." Richard scoffed. "A beautiful distraction for James, but hardly a stable influence. And now this, final act of drama. It's in the blood, I fear." The meeting was a disaster. They were relentless. I left feeling smaller than when I'd arrived, the walls of their world closing in on me. I had to become Chloe soon, or I would lose. That night, back in the secret studio, despair threatened to overwhelm me. I leaned against a large, unfinished canvas, and it shifted slightly. Behind it, taped to the wall, was a small, leather-bound book. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was Chloe's diary. The entries started out normally, excitement about a new show, funny stories about Leo. Then, after James's death, the tone changed. She wrote about her suspicions, about the convenient nature of the accident. She wrote about the pressure from Richard to sign over control of James's shares in the company. And then, the entries became frantic. "They're watching me. I feel it. The penthouse doesn't feel safe anymore. Marcus came by today. He seemed nervous. He told me to be careful, to let it go. But how can I?" I flipped to the last entry, dated the day before she died. The handwriting was rushed, slanted with fear. I found it. The shipping manifests. The discrepancies are huge. It's not just embezzlement. It's something else, something darker. I know what they did to James. They know I know. I've hidden the evidence. If anything happens to me, it's them. It was always them. I sank to the dusty floor, the diary clutched to my chest. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a confession from the grave. Chloe had been murdered, and the diary pointed a finger directly at the Blackwoods. The evaluation was in 2 days. I would have to walk into that room, not as timid Maya, but as the woman who knew their secret. I had to become Chloe, not just to save Leo, but to expose the truth. The diary in my hands was no longer just a book. It was a landmine, and every page I turned threatened to detonate what was left of my world. I sat on the cold, paint-stained floor of Chloe's secret studio, the dust motes dancing in the single bare bulb's light like ghosts, and I read. I read until my eyes ached, and my heart felt like a cold, hard stone in my chest. Chloe's investigation was meticulous. After James's death, her grief had curdled into a sharp, relentless suspicion. The official report called his sailing accident a tragedy of weather and chance. Chloe saw a pattern. James had been asking uncomfortable questions about the family business, specifically about the Blackwood Foundation's finances. He'd confided in her that he thought money was being siphoned, that the charity was a front for something corrupt. A week before he died, he'd told her he was close to having proof. The diary entries detailed her own digging. She'd used James's old login credentials to access Foundation servers. She found it, a complex web of shell companies and inflated invoices. Millions of dollars, donated by well-meaning people, were being funneled into private accounts. It was brazen, sophisticated embezzlement. But as she dug deeper, she realized it was more than just greed. The money was being used to cover up something else, something she referred to only as the project. The shipping manifest she mentioned hinted at something dark: illegal dumping, unauthorized cargo. The financial crimes were just the tip of an iceberg. Then came the most shocking revelation. In her loneliness and fear, Chloe hadn't been working alone. The entries became more personal, more vulnerable. "M understands. He's the only one in that house who sees the rot. He's risking everything to help me." It had to be Marcus. Their relationship had started as a shared mission, a bond forged in mutual distrust of Richard, and had clearly evolved into something more intimate. It was a dangerous game, an affair with her dead husband's brother, under the same roof as the people she was investigating. The final entries were written in a frantic, fearful scrawl. "They know I'm looking. Richard looked at me today at dinner, and his eyes were dead. He knows." She wrote about the feeling of being watched, the paranoia that was becoming a reality. She mentioned a safe place, a location she didn't name in the diary, where she had stored the evidence, the digital files, the printed manifests. It was her insurance policy. If anything happens to me, it's there, she wrote. The key is with Elle's favorite. They'll never think to look there. Elle's favorite. Leo's favorite. My mind raced. His favorite toy? Book? Blanket? A sound from the alley outside the studio door made me jump. A trash can lid clattering. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was not safe here. I shoved the diary into my bag, turned off the light, and listened into the darkness, every nerve ending screaming. After a few minutes of silence, I slipped out, locking the door behind me, feeling like a mouse being watched by a dozen unseen cats. Back at the penthouse, the air felt different. Knowing about the cameras made every room feel like a cage. I had to act normal, but my nerves were shredded. I made dinner for Leo, my hands shaking as I chopped vegetables. I could feel the invisible eyes on me. Were they watching now? Did they know about the studio? Did they know about the diary? Later, as I was tucking Leo into bed, he did something he hadn't done since before Chloe died. He pointed to a box of crayons and a stack of paper on his shelf. My breath caught. I brought them to him, and he solemnly began to draw. He worked with intense concentration, his brow furrowed. He didn't draw the cheerful suns and dinosaurs of before. He drew in harsh, dark strokes. When he was finished, he pushed the paper toward me. It was a drawing of a man. The figure was tall, with a severe face and a dark suit, but it was the eyes that chilled me. Leo had colored them black, empty voids, and coming from the man's hand was a jagged, angry black line, pointing toward a smaller, crying stick figure with yellow hair. A figure I knew was meant to be Chloe. He looked up at me, his own eyes wide and serious. "The bad man," he whispered. The drawing was crude, a child's rendering, but the resemblance was unmistakable. The tall stature, the severe expression, the aura of cold power. Leo had drawn a perfect likeness of Richard Blackwood. He hadn't just seen a bad man on a camera. He had seen his grandfather, and he had seen him make his mother cry. The hook wasn't just a drawing, it was a testimony. My nephew, who hadn't spoken a word for weeks, had just identified his mother's murderer. The psychological evaluation was tomorrow. I would no longer be pretending to be Chloe just to win a custody case. I would be walking into the lion's den as the woman who held their secrets, armed with nothing but a dead woman's courage and a child's truth. Elle's favorite. The phrase became an obsession. For 2 days I watched Leo, trying to see his world through Chloe's eyes. What was his favorite? He clung to Barnaby the elephant, but the key wasn't hidden there. His favorite book was a worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are, but a thorough examination revealed nothing. The pressure was immense. The psychological evaluation was a looming specter, and Richard Blackwood had just made a devastating move. A formal letter arrived, CC'd to my lawyer. It outlined plans to enroll Leo in the prestigious and incredibly remote Institut La Rosée in Switzerland. For his stability and proper upbringing, the letter stated, away from current distressing influences. It was a threat, elegant and brutal. They weren't just seeking custody. They were planning to ship my nephew to another continent, to isolate him completely. The game had escalated. Desperation sharpened my mind. I was putting Leo to bed, reading him his favorite book, when he reached not for the book, but for the music box on his nightstand. It was a beautiful old-fashioned thing, a gift from James's mother. When you opened it, a ballerina spun to a tinkling lullaby. It was Leo's absolute favorite ritual. "Music, Aunt Maya?" he whispered, his first full sentence in weeks. Elle's favorite. My hands trembled as I picked up the music box. I examined it, feeling for seams, for a false bottom. Nothing. Then I looked at the key. It was small, brass, and unlike any key to a door I'd ever seen. It was for winding the mechanism. With a sinking feeling, I realized it was removable. I carefully pulled it out. It wasn't just a winding key. The end was a standard USB connector. My breath hitched. I rushed to my laptop, plugged it in. A single folder appeared, labeled Ballerina. Inside were spreadsheets, bank transfers, encrypted emails, and photographs. Chloe's evidence. It was all here. The embezzlement from the foundation, the shell companies, and photos of industrial barrels being loaded onto a Blackwood cargo ship, under cover of darkness. This was the project. This was what James had died for. I was staring at the proof when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. A text message. "The ballerina holds the key. But you already knew that. We need to talk." Daniel. Ice water flooded my veins. How did he know? Who was Daniel? Another text followed. "Chloe trusted me. I was her source inside Blackwood Global. I'm the one who helped her get those manifests. Meet me, today, 4 p.m., City Gardens, by the fountain." It was a trap. It had to be. But what choice did I have? He knew about the music box. He knew about the evidence. I was playing a dangerous game with rules I didn't understand. The City Gardens were public, at least. I went as Maya, nerves stretched taut. Daniel was a man in his late 30s, with a tired, intelligent face. He didn't look like a villain. He looked like an accountant who hadn't slept in weeks. Chloe said you were the smart one, he said without preamble, his eyes scanning the surroundings. She said if anything went wrong, I should find you. Who are you? I demanded, my voice low. A whistleblower with a guilty conscience, he said bitterly. I'm a financial analyst at Blackwood Global. I helped Chloe, because what they're doing is monstrous. The foundation fraud is just the pocket change. The real money is in the illegal dumping. Toxic waste, shipped overseas and dumped where regulations are lax. James found out. He threatened to go public, and they killed him, I finished, the words tasting like ash. Daniel nodded grimly. And when Chloe started digging, they killed her too. They made it look like suicide. Richard has people everywhere, Maya. You're not safe. Trusting him felt like stepping off a cliff. But he had information I needed. He was the mysterious M in the diary. It didn't quite fit, but the connection was there. That evening, the stakes were made terrifyingly clear. A black car followed me home from the grocery store. It didn't try to hide. It was a message. We are watching. It was time to stop being Maya. The timid librarian had to disappear. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror. I didn't just put on Chloe's clothes. I put on her armor. I did my makeup the way she did. Darker, more dramatic. I let my posture change. My shoulders going back, my chin tilting up. I practiced her smile in the mirror. Not a gentle curve, but a brilliant, challenging flash of teeth. When I went to the kitchen, Leo looked up from his cereal. He stared at me for a long moment, his head tilted. A tiny, confused frown appeared, and then it vanished, replaced by something else. A flicker of recognition. He didn't see his Aunt Maya. He saw a ghost of his mother. It was the most painful victory I'd ever known. I had to test the new persona. I went to a boutique Chloe loved and bought a dress, using her credit card. I spoke to the saleswoman with Chloe's easy, confident charm. The woman didn't blink. She saw Chloe Blackwood, the artist. The performance was working. Returning to the penthouse, I felt a strange, electric power. This is how Chloe must have felt, able to command a room, to dare the world. As I stepped out of the elevator, I found Isabella Blackwood waiting for me in the hallway, her expression unreadable. She looked me up and down, taking in the clothes, the makeup, the new way I held myself. A slow, cold smile spread across her perfectly painted lips. I know you're not Chloe, she said, her voice a low, confidential whisper that froze the blood in my veins. The performance is good, Maya. Very good. But I know, my heart stopped. The game was over before it had begun. Then she leaned closer, her scent of expensive perfume enveloping me. But I might be able to help you, she murmured, because the man you're trying to fool is the same man who murdered my stepson. And I want to see him burn. Isabella's words hung in the penthouse foyer like smoke. I know you're not Chloe. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. All my efforts, the careful study, the practiced mannerisms, it had all been for nothing. She saw through me, but her next words were a lifeline tossed into a churning sea. I want to see him burn. She didn't come in. She simply pressed a small, folded note into my hand, her eyes darting toward the elevator as if expecting Richard to appear at any moment. Read it, then destroy it, she whispered, before turning and walking away, the click of her heels echoing down the hall. Inside, with the door double-locked, I unfolded the note. It was an address for a maritime insurance assessor and a claim number. James's boat, the note said. The official report is a lie. This was the crack in the wall I needed. Using the public computers at the library to avoid any digital trail from the penthouse, I dug into the claim. The official cause for the sinking of James's sailboat, the Calypso, was listed as structural failure due to severe weather. But Isabella's note led me to the raw assessor's notes, the ones that never made the final report. The notes mentioned unusual stress fractures around the keel bolts, fractures inconsistent with storm damage. They suggested the possibility of, quote, pre-impact compromise. The assessor had been pressured to sign off on the weather theory. The word sabotage was scribbled in the margin, and then hastily crossed out. James hadn't drowned by accident. His boat had been tampered with. He was murdered because he was getting too close to the truth. The evidence on Chloe's USB drive now had a bloody context. The illegal dumping wasn't just a financial crime. It was an environmental atrocity that the Blackwoods were willing to kill to protect. I met Daniel again, this time in a noisy, crowded food court where we could talk unnoticed. I showed him the assessor's notes on my phone. His face, already grim, turned to stone. It's worse than you think, he said, his voice low. The waste they're dumping isn't just toxic. It's radioactive. Medical waste, industrial byproducts from a subsidiary they keep off the books. They're poisoning entire coastlines to save on disposal costs. The sheer scale of the evil was staggering. The charity galas, the hospital wings. It was all a grotesque facade. Why are you really helping me, Daniel? I asked, the question that had been gnawing at me. You're not just a whistleblower. He looked at me, and the mask of the weary accountant finally slipped. A raw, painful grief shone through. "No," he admitted. "I'm not. My name isn't Daniel. It's Daniel Blackwood." James was my older brother. The betrayal was a physical blow. I recoiled. "You're one of them?" "I was the family disappointment," he said, bitterness etching his words. "I refused to go into the business. I became an accountant to understand their world, to find a way to bring them down from the inside. James was the good son, until he grew a conscience. They killed him for it. I'm not helping you, Maya. We're helping each other. For James. For Chloe." The alliance felt like a pact with a ghost. He was driven by vengeance, but his goal aligned with mine. We needed a public stage, a place where the truth would be too loud to ignore. The perfect opportunity was approaching. The Blackwood Foundation's annual Hope Gala, a glittering event where the city's elite gathered to celebrate the family's philanthropy. The irony was perfect. "We exposed them there," Daniel said, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "I can get you in. You come as Chloe. No one will question it. I'll handle the audiovisual systems. We'll broadcast their crimes on every screen in the room." It was a dangerous, audacious plan, but it was the only one we had. That night, as I was helping Leo get ready for bed, he was unusually agitated. The impending gala, the tension in the apartment, he could feel it. He pulled on my sleeve, his small face serious. "Aunt Maya," he said, his voice small. "The bad man," he yelled. I knelt down, my heart in my throat. "When, sweetheart? When did he yell?" "Before Mommy, before she slept." His words were a child's, but the memory was clear in his eyes. "He was here," he said Mommy was a bad girl. Said she had to stop. Mommy cried. He had witnessed it. The final confrontation. Richard had been here, in this apartment, the night Chloe died. He had threatened her. Leo's testimony, combined with the evidence, was the final piece. It wasn't just motive and opportunity anymore. It was an eyewitness. The following day was spent in a frenzy of preparation. I practiced my Chloe persona until it felt less like a costume and more like a second skin. I selected a stunning, blood-red gown from her closet, a color of defiance. Daniel and I coordinated our plans through encrypted messages. Everything was set. Then, as I was applying Chloe's signature red lipstick, my phone buzzed. It was a text message. The sender's name made my blood run cold. It was from Chloe. The message was short, simple, and terrifying. "Stop digging, or you'll end up like me." I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. They knew everything. They knew about Daniel. They knew about the gala. The text was a shot across the bow, a final warning. But it was also a mistake, because now I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that the killer was in my phone's contact list. And tomorrow night, at the gala, I was going to walk right into the lion's den and look them in the eye. The Blackwood Foundation's Hope Gala was a symphony of hypocrisy. Crystal chandeliers glittered above a sea of diamonds and black tie elegance. The air hummed with the sound of champagne flutes and self-congratulatory laughter. I moved through the crowd as Chloe, a vision in her blood-red gown, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against the delicate wire Daniel had taped to my skin. Every smile I flashed felt like a crack in my composure. Every hand I shook belonged to someone who might be complicit. I saw Richard holding court near the ice sculpture, the epitome of patriarchal benevolence. Isabella stood beside him, a serene smile plastered on her face, but her eyes met mine for a split second, and in them I saw a flicker of cold resolve. Marcus was nearby, laughing too loudly, his eyes scanning the room with a restless energy. They were all here, the players in Chloe's tragedy. Daniel's voice crackled faintly in my earpiece. "I'm in the AV booth. Systems are ready. On your signal." This was it, the moment of no return. I took a deep breath, channeling every ounce of Chloe's audacity. I walked to the center of the dance floor, directly under the largest chandelier. The music faltered as I tapped my spoon against my glass. 1,000 eyes turned toward me. "Friends," I said, my voice amplified, ringing with a confidence I didn't feel. "Thank you for coming to celebrate hope." I paused, letting the word hang in the air. But hope means nothing without truth. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Richard's smile had frozen on his face. He started toward me, but I raised my voice. My husband, James, loved this foundation. He believed in its mission. But he discovered that the mission was a lie. I looked directly at Richard. He discovered that you, his own father, were using it as a piggy bank, that you were embezzling millions to cover up something much darker. The crowd gasped. Richard's face purpled. "Chloe, you're hysterical." "Grief has. The illegal dumping, Richard," I shouted, cutting him off. "The toxic waste. The radioactive materials. James found out, and you had him killed. You sabotaged his boat." Chaos erupted. Daniel, right on cue, cut the music. On every screen in the grand ballroom, the documents from Chloe's USB drive flashed to life. The spreadsheets, the photos of the barrels, the damning shipping manifests. The room was filled with a chorus of shocked exclamations. It was then that Isabella stepped forward. She walked to my side, turning to face the crowd. Her voice was calm, clear, and carried a lifetime of bitter resolve. "She's telling the truth," Isabella declared. "For 20 years, I've been a prisoner to this man's greed. I've watched him destroy everything decent." She pulled a small recorder from her clutch. "This is a conversation between Richard and his foreman, discussing the disposal of the evidence after James's accident." Richard stared at his wife, betrayal and fury twisting his features. "You treacherous," but he never finished. A gunshot rang out, shattering a crystal vase near my head. The crowd screamed, diving for cover. It wasn't Richard who had fired. It was Marcus. He stood by the stage, a pistol in his hand, his charming facade gone, replaced by a snarl of pure rage. "You stupid, sentimental fools," he spat. "You think this was about money? This was about the future. The future of this family. James was weak. Chloe was a nosy bitch. And you," he pointed the gun at me, "you're just a ghost who's overstayed her welcome." Marcus, the overlooked younger brother, seething with resentment. He was the architect. He had manipulated Richard, handled the dirty work, and played the concerned brother-in-law to get close to Chloe. He was the true mastermind. "The exits are blocked," Daniel's voice yelled in my ear. "Get to the service hallway behind the kitchen. There's a passage to the old carriage house." Amid the panic, I grabbed Isabella's arm. "Leo! He's with the nanny in the upstairs suite." We fought our way through the screaming crowd, Marcus's shots going wild above our heads. We found Leo, terrified but safe, in the suite. The three of us, the imposter, the betrayed wife, and the silent child, raced down a narrow, hidden servants' staircase Isabella knew from her years in the house. We burst out into a dark, cobblestoned courtyard. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance. But Marcus was there, waiting for us, silhouetted against the moonlit night. He had anticipated our escape. "It really is a pity," he said, raising the gun again, this time aiming directly at me. "You almost made it." We were cornered. There was nowhere to run. I clutched Leo tight, shielding him with my body, waiting for the shot. But it never came. A figure lunged from the shadows, tackling Marcus to the ground. The gun skittered across the cobblestones. In the dim light, I saw the two men wrestling, grunts of effort filling the air. The figure pinning Marcus down was Daniel. He wasn't fighting like an accountant. He was fighting like a man possessed, his vengeance finally within reach. As police swarmed the courtyard, flooding it with lights, Daniel looked up at me, his face bruised but triumphant. In that moment, he wasn't a Blackwood. He was just James's brother, finally delivering the justice that had been denied for so long. The hook was not a threat, but a realization. As the police handcuffed a screaming Marcus and a defeated Richard, my gaze met Isabella's. The person I never expected to help me, the icy, calculating wife, had been the key to it all. She had played the long game, and she had won. Our alliance, born of mutual survival, had just toppled an empire. The aftermath of the gala was a media firestorm. The fall of the Blackwood Empire was front-page news for weeks. Richard and Marcus were charged with a litany of crimes: murder, fraud, illegal dumping, conspiracy. The evidence Chloe had gathered, combined with Isabella's recordings and Daniel's testimony, was overwhelming. The charity was dissolved, their assets seized. The towering edifice of respectability crumbled into dust, revealing the rot at its core. In the quiet that followed, I faced a different kind of battle. The custody case was dismissed. Leo was safe with me. But who was me? Standing in front of my mirror in my own apartment, surrounded by my own quiet, orderly things, I felt like a stranger. The reflection showed Maya's face, but the woman looking back had Chloe's fire in her eyes. I'd worn my sister's identity like a suit of armor for so long that I wasn't sure how to take it off. Did I even want to? The timid librarian was gone, incinerated in the crucible of the past few months. What remained was a hybrid, a woman forged from both sisters' strengths. Leo's healing became my compass. With the immediate threat gone, the fortress wall around him began to crumble. It started with small sentences about his day, then questions about his mother. One afternoon, he was drawing at the kitchen table. Not the dark, angry sketches of before, but a bright, sunny picture of a woman with yellow hair holding a little boy's hand. "That's Mommy," he said, his voice clear. "She's in the stars now. But she told me to be brave for you, Aunt Maya." Tears streamed down my face. It was the first time he'd spoken of her without fear. We began to talk about Chloe openly, sharing happy memories. We visited her grave, and Leo left one of his pictures for her. The silence was broken, replaced by the slow, painful, but beautiful work of remembrance. I needed to honor Chloe in a way that was true to her spirit. Using a portion of the inheritance that was rightfully Leo's, I established the Chloe Blackwood Foundation for Creative Healing. We turned her secret downtown studio into a sanctuary, a place where traumatized children could use art, just as Leo had, to express the things they couldn't say. It wasn't about creating masterpieces. It was about making messes, about splashing color onto pain. It was the perfect legacy for my vibrant, messy, brilliant sister. Months passed. Life found a new, peaceful rhythm. Leo started school. I went back to work at the library, but now I walked the quiet halls with a new confidence. I was no longer just Maya the archivist. I was a survivor, a protector. One day, a plain postcard arrived in the mail. There was no return address, just a picture of a serene Italian garden. The message was short, written in an elegant, familiar hand. She would be proud of you. Watch your back. There are more snakes in the garden. Maya sigh. Isabella. She had disappeared after the trial. Her part in the drama complete. The message was a warning, but also a recognition. The battle was won, but the war against that kind of corruption was never truly over. There would always be more snakes, but I was no longer afraid of them. I looked over at Leo, who was laughing as he tried to teach Barnaby the elephant how to do his homework. The sound was a balm to my soul. I had set out to protect my sister's child, and in doing so, I had found a stronger version of myself. Chloe's legacy wasn't just the foundation. It was the fierce love that had forced me to become a warrior. It was the truth she died for, and the future she saved for her son. The twin thread had been severed, but in its place, a new, unbreakable bond had been woven. I had not just lost a sister. I had found a part of her living on inside me. And as I watched Leo laugh, I knew that was the greatest secret of all.